threw up a tweet a little earlier talking about workload management, giving a little workload tip. So I figured it's Saturday night, I got nothing better to do. Why not throw together a little discussion around not only my topic tonight and what I posted about earlier, but one of the questions that I received as well from my tweet earlier. So let's check out the tweet from earlier. This is from me earlier. I said, workload tip, start your off-season throwing program with 4 days a week, not 3. Start these workloads at no less than 6 daily workload. I'll explain that a little bit here. Guys often start too low in their workloads days of throwing and end up spiking their workload in month 2 as they start to introduce intensity. So this is true. We have models that will show this, and again, I'll show this in a minute here. But what was cool was one of the questions that I got in response to this from Brett Fuller says, for a high school player getting ready to start their off-season throwing program after taking a couple months off, what might volume, intensity, distance look like for you if you had them throwing 4 times a week to start? So this is a great question, and a question that comes up a lot. This is a question that I get quite often when I start talking about one-day workloads. So I figured I'd simplify this tonight. Figured I'd break it down and then show you how we plan and build throwing programs at KP for the off season. Right now, our guys are in, for the most part, week 2, getting kicked up here in their throwing process. They got about 4 months before spring training for our pro guys. Many of our high school guys, our college guys, kind of same thing, kind of building down, building back up. So let's talk about that tonight and show you guys a little bit about how we design throwing programs. So I'm going to pop that up here. Give me just a sec. And boom. So this is a chart that I made. It looks at our long toss, our specific work, pull downs, our velo day, command day, etc. Plyo care throws, and it's going to value what we call a 1-day workload. So I'll give you guys an example here. Let's do this too. This is representing intensity. So just as most people would know it, this is like by distance, I guess you could say. It's really just, perceived exertion here. So we're talking about 100% in some cases. If a guy throws 300 feet, let's say, the 20% of that would be the 60 feet for that athlete. So let's say this is a day of this athlete's throwing. It can be broken apart however we want to, right? We could do like a 1 pound plyo care throw. We could do, let's say, 20 of them. And this is going to calculate for us the resulting workload from doing so. Let's say we did 60 feet. We threw the ball nice and light for 20 throws. You're going to see that's 1.5 again right there for our daily workload. So what you see here in this column is the resulting or projected torque on the arm for that throw. So to explain that, when we throw a baseball, there is a measurement that we'll get from a throwing sleeve that will track Newton meters of torque, basically how much stress is being applied to that elbow. It's a global stress, so people will talk about different musculature in the elbow and how we need to individualize that. Right now, technology only allows us to see, basically an idea of what happens globally across the medial elbow when we throw. Won't get too far into that tonight, but keeping it simple, just so that you guys know what these numbers represent. This is Newton meters of torque, Newton meters as we look at this, and we're going to use this to calculate. So what this is doing is it's calculating this value based on an athlete's height and weight. So up here would be the athlete's height and weight projected. I basically put him at 6 foot, 200 pounds in this case. And we're looking at the number of throws this athlete's going to do. So to the question, which was basically, what would you prescribe in terms of volume, intensity, and distance? This is going to be completely different for everybody. But for a 6-foot athlete who's 200 pounds and throwing the ball at only this torque value, at only 20 Newton meters, which is very light. If I told this guy, I might tell him, hey, I want you to do this throw at 50% effort, right? And he's going to go ahead and throw. Let's say he did 20 throws. But reality, that 50% effort was at 60 feet. It was kind of out an arc. It was nice and easy. Let's say he did it for 20 throws. This is what I'm really more interested in, which is that 1-day workload value. So, we have an athlete who does 20 throws here. And, in terms of, again, intensity, in terms of distance, Day one, I let our athletes kind of choose. Do you want to do 60 feet to 90 feet? Somewhere in that range, I'm okay with. I want the ball to be kind of on an arc. I want you to give me somewhere around 50% effort and intensity. But we've got some athletes that throw harder than others, meaning that they just want to move a little bit quicker. We got some athletes that throw from different arm slots, which also plays factor into this and how much torque is being received or measured. And some athletes are just different sizes, height, weight, etc. All that playing factor into how this calculation is coming out. So when we look at a daily workload value, this is the calculation for it. So bear with me. This is the math side of it. Ready? Daily workload values. We take the torque value. So in this case, the 20. We raise that over height times weight. So it's the 20 Newton meters divided by your height times weight. And then we take that to the power of 1.3. We get an output for a single throw. So in this case, if I only had one throw here, right, it would use that calculation. It's telling me I have roughly 0.1 resulting workload. Now, if I do that time and time and time again, I'm going to add all of those throws, all that volume together, and it's going to start giving me an output. So in this case, it's a 1.5. So if I'm looking at an athlete, I'm saying to this athlete, hey, I want you to give me a 6 one-day workload today. Some athletes, in this case, we're going to go ahead and move them up to a 6. So there's a 3 so far. We're at 20 throws at 20%, 10 throws at 30%. So let's go ahead and move that up. We got more volume to play with here. Okay, we need to move that up, more volume to play with here. And boom, there we go. So there's 50 throws, and that's generally what happens on day one for guys. Somewhere in the ballpark of 50, 60, 70 throws, 40 throws. Somewhere in that range, you're going to find that guys get to a 6 one-day workload. So, for our guys, I'm looking at somewhere in that ballpark. They can mix in plyos too. So in this case, we have our projected torque for plyos. Let's say that we take this down to a 20, and then we take this to a 10. You can start to see how I disperse this across the different days. Let's say I do 5 with a 1-pound ball. Boom, I'm at a 6.3, close enough. I'm at my number for the day. So you can see how athletes kind of start to disperse these throws differently in different drills or in different throwing types, different throwing distances, and still accomplish that daily load value. So in this case, that 6 is what we're looking for from day one. So this is kind of how we structure our program with our athletes. We say, hey, you have a 20 today. And for me, right out of the gate, obviously don't want athletes throwing the ball 100% effort. Day one, we want to build that slowly, but I leave it to them to monitor that progression. I leave it to them to, kind of how they want to mix this up too. I mean, some guys we do work more specifically with certain drills. Some guys we are looking to be more specific with our long toss. And we devise different plans or different strategies based around this one-day workload value. And again, that one-day workload value, the way that we explain this to a lot of people, I'll give you a good example here. One-day workload encompasses both volume and intensity. So the way to think about this, right? Imagine if I put you in the weight room and I said, hey, I want you to put 10 pounds on the bar and I want you to back squat. For most people, that's not a big deal. 10 pounds on the bar, hopefully for our high-level athletes, it's not a big deal, 10 pounds on the bar, right? But if I told you to do it 500 times, okay, now that becomes a pretty big deal. So volume has relevance. At the end of the day, what we're trying to accomplish by creating these one-day workload values is we're trying to measure when does this athlete become fatigued, because we don't want this athlete to become fatigued. When the athlete's fatigued, we're at a higher risk of injury. So we're creating these values, these daily load values to create some calculations to manage workload, manage fatigue. So in this case, for our athletes, with the weight on the bar example, right? If the athlete does a lot of volume, it doesn't matter how hard he's throwing. If he does too much volume, he can fatigue himself. If we do too much intensity, it may not be a lot of volume. So in this case of the weight, right? The intensity being if I put 500 pounds on the bar and I do it 5 times, chances are I'm going to be pretty fatigued the next day if I'm not used to squatting 500 pounds. So again, that's intensity and we have volume. So this number encapsulates both intensity and volume. So what I mean by that here and how we're looking at this on day one is we have, again, going back to, let's say we had one throw, right? So we have one throw at 20%. That's 0.1. That's a single throw's value. Now, if I go to 2 throws, you see how it starts to, you won't see it here until we can get a couple throws up. There you go, 3 or 0.2. So there's 4, there's 5, and you see how that number starts to go up. So every throw we make, we're calculating the intensity of that throw, and then we're adding each and every throw value together to create an account for volume overall in the day. So with that being said, that's how we create a single day's value. And that's where when you hear me say, we want our athletes to start with a 6 one-day workload, that's what I'm talking about. Now, let's look at an off-season model. So this is an off-season model. This is 4 months. See month 1, see month 4. We're building our athletes out. So a chronic workload, this is our fitness level. We want to build them up to a 13. That's our goal. And so all we do is we devise this model. We start to add in our numbers week over week, and we start to increase the intensity on specific days, providing adequate recovery periods, trying to manage and look at the effects of load. How much are we doing daily? So you see this little dotted line over the top. This is our AC ratio that just manages how much intensity we can and how much load we can increase kind of day over day. So you see it kind of peak up here. Let's see right there at a 1.32. So good research out there indicates that we want to be between a 0.7 and 1.3. Reality is if we go up to a 1.4, it's not the end of the world. Somewhere in that 1.3 range is kind of our peak. That's what we want to just touch and then come back down. And so you see that happens quite a bit here. So we go through our weeks. Boom, we hit our cap. Boom, hit our cap, hit our cap, hit our cap. Now, what I want to talk about here is kind of the goal of an off season. Make sure that we're all on the same page here. We understand what the goal of an off season is. So when we think about an off season, I want you to think about the off season kind of like a marathon, right? So we got to build up over time to be ready for a marathon. Now, I'm in no shape to run a marathon today. I'm starting to build up my running the last couple of months as it is, but I'm in no shape to run a marathon today. I need a lot more mileage on me. I need to be able to build my fitness more to get there. But in this case, if I was, you gave me 6 more months, I could probably be ready to run a marathon with just diligent training and good programming. Most athletes, most people could get there. Now, with our athletes, throwing is no different. We're looking at arm endurance. We usually say arm strength, but we're looking at arm endurance. So the idea here is that we're trying to go from day one, if we've taken, and like the tweet said, we took a couple months off. Day one, we haven't done much of anything in the last couple months or weeks. And our goal is to build to be ready for season. Now, starters are typically a 15 chronic workload. So if we go back to our example of the marathon, right, think about that as that's race day. We got to be at a 15 for throwing chronic workload. We got to be at that number by our first game of the season. That's our goal. In terms of race day, we got to accumulate and build up that fitness to be able to handle that mileage for day one of that marathon. So when we look at this, it's the same thing. This white line represents that fitness level. We're trying to build that fitness level all the way throughout the off season, and then we're trying to get into the start of our season at that 13 to 15 chronic workload. Most guys, pro guys, if we drop them off at 13 into spring training, that's a nice progression space for them. They'll get to 15 by the end of spring training. High school guys, they'll kind of cruise in season around that 13. College guys are going to play inter-squad games, getting prepped for season to get to that 15. So our goal here is, from my side of it with Kinetic Pro, we drop our guys off at 13. So you're going to see that number 13 here. But reality is we're trying to get into that 15 before season starts. So going back to our main focus here, which is this week 1, how and why did I talk about adding 4 days of throwing in here? How and why did I talk about the 1-day workload value of 6? Reality is we have a time constraint here. We have 4 months, and you see me bouncing the AC ratio to 1.3 quite a few times here, up into that 1.3 range to try to make sure that our guys get adequate build here. And I'm also going from 4 days a week, and I'm building that to 5 days, and then building that to 6 days a week. So our goal is to start to accumulate more load throughout the week. And you see that we do this nice build here, which we usually focus on kind of long toss during this period. We start to introduce a 10-pitch bullpen, 15-pitch bullpen during this period, and then we kind of deload a little bit midwinter. We add that 5th day. We start to build and prepare, especially our starters here. This is a starter model. Prepare our starters to start to handle those 1 innings, 2 innings, 3 innings, etc. as we get out. Typically, our guys are leaving us with 3 innings of work at this 35 1-day workload, and that's kind of our goal. So I want to talk about this in the sense that there's a key to this, and So the question often gets asked again, how much volume should I do? So some coaches say, oh, you should throw 30 throws 3 times a week at 60 feet to start, and then you build to 75 feet and you throw, 50 throws 3 times a week, and you build to 4 times a week, 5 times, etc. You could do something like that. Sure. It's just going to take more time to be ready to go for a season. And reality is, so this number here, you're going to see this fitness level number, right? This 3.43. So this is chronic workload. And if any of you guys have had experiences with workload or trying to project workload in the past, one of the things that you're going to see here is that I have this nice number of a 3.43. And now many of you guys know that chronic workload is based off the average daily workload over the last 28 days, right? So what I've done here is I've taken this week and I've assumed that this athlete is built up enough to handle this week 1, right? A 6, a 6, a 6, and a 6. We've assumed that this athlete could handle this. So what I've done is I've created what we call a pad. And I take this first week and I replicate it back 28 days. And I say, okay, this athlete's going to be built to handle this. That's going to give us our base, our foundation chronic workload. So we assume this athlete's going to be built up coming into the throwing program at a 3.43. And then we're going to build off of that. So we're going to assume that this athlete has this carrying workload capacity of 3.43, this fitness level. So we start this guy at a 6, a 6, a 6, and a 6. And we know that he's not going to have any issues with this. Majority of our athletes, I would tell you that there are very, very, very few cases I've ever even questioned this, if an athlete could handle this week 1 or not. Most athletes are arguably, in my case, I would say that most athletes could actually probably start on this week 2, where they could go 5-8, 5-8. Week 3, 5-10, 5-10 is a little bit more. And again, this is all based around volume and low intensity. We're encouraging our athletes with volume and low intensity. We start to increase intensity as we get out to our good long tosses. But this first week is very, very, very light still. And most athletes, they get bored. It's kind of funny watching them throw. They get bored. Throwing 50 balls, 60 balls, at 50% intensity, they want to start increasing. So typically you're pulling the athlete back a little bit to get these first 2 weeks accomplished, but this is where you build that base. This is where you start that foundation from. And I would argue, like I said, each athlete's different. We could start some athletes probably up here in week 4, and they'd be okay. We could probably start some athletes right here on week 1, and that's just the perfect place for them. We don't have a way of measuring that in today's game. Something that we're working on at Kinetic Pro, trying to figure that out, trying to put some numbers together to make that happen. But this is universally kind of where we've chosen to start, guys. And I like that progression. I like this model. Our athletes seem to respond well to that too. We've had good feedback from it. But remember, it's not saying that every athlete's going to throw 50 or 60 throws. It's saying that each athlete's going to get to a 6, which will be completely different for the different athletes that we have. Mind you, some of our pro guys especially, we've got some low slot guys, we've got some high slot guys, we've got some high stress guys that are a little bit longer, some really tight, small arm action, short arm action guys that a little bit less stress overall. So everybody's throwing a little bit differently, and that also can be a thing with our throwing partners, right? So as a coach, we manage that by introducing plyos and utilizing plyos to teach, especially in the first couple of weeks, where you don't have to have a throwing partner match you throw for throw. This can also pose an issue in a throwing program. So sometimes in that case, we actually like to have and encourage our athletes to utilize single throws to a pad, make our throws more skill specific, meaning that we're working on command or even some sort of change up design or some sort of like discussion early, even though it's low intensity, into a target. Or I like to use plyos at the end of our throwing day to manage this as well. I'll say this is one of my issues with blanket programs. When we start to talk about we're going to do this type of day, and you start to label that day, you start to title that day, this is a recovery day or whatever you want to label that day in throwing, and you structure your plan to say, hey, we have this strategy of throwing, and you put especially like plyos first, and you just start to play catch with somebody, or the assumption is that you're going to go through this routine. We start to miss the mark and realizing that we need some autonomy for the player to be able to strategize and create these throwing days where that week 1, week 2, etc. makes sense. And as we get bigger workloads and our guys have more, volume, more capacity throughout the day, yeah, we can probably start to structure those and streamline those a little bit more. But again, we want periods of time where the athlete can look to their phone, figure out that 1-day workload, and kind of move from there. So hopefully this makes sense for you. I'll do this as well. If you look here, I'll say this last thing here is that if you look on like week 3, for example, the progression upward. Let's say week 3, this athlete goes, instead of doing a 5-10, 5-10, let's say we want to increase a little bit. Let's say we go 5-12, 5-12. You're going to see how this model is built. This is a moving model. So if you're wondering like how I've tested this and how I came up with this assumption of like a 6-6, 6-6, I'm not saying that's the perfect week 1. I'm just saying that in most cases, most people start too low and they never give themselves a chance to build up. And I've tried to build models that would go just 3 days a week and get ourselves to an adequate place before the season starts, and we just don't get there. So how we've done that, I'll give you a good example here. You'll see like that 5-10, 5-10 there. If I add a 12 here and I add a 12 here and I hit enter, you're going to see that model is now changing, and you're going to see that the AC ratio is changing. So I have this whole process, this whole program built out to where this is how we model throwing programs. We can create these values, change them, watch the effects of the AC ratio. You'll see in this case, this is going to be a 1.36, which is not bad, a 1.38, but then that pushes the following week to a 1.44, which again is a little bit high. So we're going to pull that back down. We go 110, 110, 510, 510, and that's where we start to progress from. So this is how we build it. We kind of monitor it. We see the effects of the chronic workload. We see the effects of the AC ratio. We start to design this by the numbers to say, hey, this is projectively what we want you to do. We hand this off to our athlete, give them the autonomy to choose how they want to execute it, and then we let them go out and actually accomplish it. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully that answers the question. To directly say in this case, what volume or what intensity. Again, it's kind of in the athlete's hands. All I really care about as a coach, I want to make sure this athlete does not go over a 6. In this case, I also don't want this athlete to be throwing max intensity or 70% intensity or what I judge to be too hard. I kind of pull him back a little bit. I say, hey, let's keep this ball on an arc, and give them kind of the trust as for me as a coach to say, hey, listen, let's be honest here. You tell me what intensity that was. But I think there's a lot of value in a lot of this talk right now around things like measuring arm speed to judge intensity, measuring with the radar gun to judge intensity. There's just not a perfect solution. I'll tell you with the radar gun, one of the big issues with the radar gun is, we don't have what 50% is on a radar gun. If you throw 90, generally speaking, 45 is not going to be 50%. Most guys throw 50% and they're in the 60, mile an hour range. So, that doesn't really work like real directly, and different guys have different velocities that they feel is 50%. Arm speed, if we're starting to look at arm speed, is that. There's a number of issues with, the sensor that gets worn to measure this. That sensor can be put on improperly. That sensor can, move a little bit in the strap that it's in. That sensor is highly accurate in the sense of what it is, but it's not really like an arm sleeve. It's not an arm speed gauge super well. It's a workload management tool and a step up from pitch counts and a step up from innings limits. It's a step up from what we've previously used, but it's not really a biomechanics tool. And I think if we start to go down that path, we start to look down that line, we start to run into some issues here with misusing a technology that's maybe not mostly defined or built to handle that type of rigorous 10 RPMs or 100 RPM type focus from an athlete, especially in a throwing session. I think you're more better off doing that and evaluating that afterward and seeing what you have. But during the session, inter-session use of those metrics, I don't think are really the way to go about this. That product's not designed for velocity. It's not a velocity tool. It's a workload management tool. And I don't think we should go down a path of kind of misconstruing that. So with that being said, we look at week 1, like I said, we start to figure out, how do we do that? It's talking to the athlete right now. It's figuring out what their 50% somewhat looks like from, their perspective. It's giving them the autonomy to be able to, execute that. And at the end of the day, just staying below a 6, if we can stay, we can get athletes to understand, first and foremost, we can get athletes to understand what it means to just hit a daily workload. We win across the board as an industry. So I think that should be our main focus first and foremost, is educating around that, kind of hitting that mark and going from there. So questions on modeling and how we do this, happy to answer them for you guys. Hopefully this was helpful. But if you guys have any further questions moving forward into the future, DMs are always open. You can contact me on email at casey@kineticprobaseball.com. I know this is a bit more lengthy tonight, but hopefully it was helpful. We'll go back to our main screen here, the main questions. And again, Brett, appreciate the question. Anybody else that has questions on these things, please feel free to reach out, comment on my posts, and I will try to throw together some better explainers like this into the future to help you guys out. So that's KP Short, and this will be archived up on YouTube, distributed out on Twitter. Keep the questions coming. Appreciate it, guys. As always, we'll talk soon. See you.